Hola, buenas noches. Thank you for joining the Dynamo Art Talks. Thank you, Robbie, for accepting the invitation to present your work. It's really nice to have you here. We're very all curious to learn about your experience and your artistic practice. So, as you know, Robert Steinberger, born in the 1989 in Cologne, in Germany. And he earned in 2001 the Bachelor in Visual Arts at San Diego State University. He lives and works in Zurich. Robert works in performance and creates and writes as part of his artistic practice, working both solo and collaboratively. He was part of the collective Friction in since 2012. He has exhibited and performance works at the Musée d'Art et d'Histoire du Judaïsme in Paris, at the Aargauer Kunsthaus in the LISTE Basel and Stadtgalerie Bern, as well as the Theatre Gessnerallee in the Helmhaus in Zurich and the Atelier Hermann Haller in the last Tango and Réunion and Perla-Mode, and in the Art Institute in San Diego in California, among others. So thank you, Robin. I join you later with some questions.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. My love, you're invited to an Abendessen at my house in Alpine on the 30th of April at 6 p.m. You'll find a place full of memories, longing, and a lot of laughter. Can you smell the food already? Onyu died this month 2 years ago, and I'm still wearing her clothes. I hope you won't mind my attire. It might not sit too well with you, but I hope you will still sit with me. All I want is... Oh, nur wer die Sehnsucht kennt, weiß, was ich leide. Allein und abgetrennt von aller Freude, der mich liebt und kennt, ist in der Weite. Do you understand, dear? Only one who knows desire understands what I suffer. Alone and separated from all joy, the one who loves and knows me is far, far away. My address is 2989 North Victoria Drive, Alpine, California, 91901. I'll be waiting for you, so please don't be late. Yours, Robbie. This was the invitation that I sent out for my thesis project I did in California in 2011, which was titled My Significant Other. And the piece kind of developed in two phases. First was a performance I did within my family, in a way, in which about a year after my grandmother passed away, who we called Onyu, which I mentioned in the invitation. I wore her dresses when I went back to visit my family in Europe. I was living in California at the time, and I recorded conversations with video. I recorded conversations with my parents in these dresses without them knowing before that I would do this. And so out of this, a lot of material developed, video material, which and the conversations were born out of this provocation of mine, of first of all cross-dressing, and they didn't really know if this was a serious interest of mine, and it wasn't something I did other than in this performance, and then above that to wear the dresses of my grandmother who passed away, so it seemed a bit weird. And so I want to show you in the second part of the project, I invited people to this house in Alpine that I mentioned in the invitation, and there were video installations or video projections, and one of the videos was from these encounters, and this was in Budapest in Hungary, where my parents and grandparents are originally from. So I want to show you that video I showed back then.
Eigentlich ein Serviertisch. Möchtest du jetzt so mit uns essen heute Abend? Nein. Das ist doch nicht dein Ernst.
Vollkommen mein Ernst.
Wofür ist das denn gut? Was bringt das denn? Das ist Performance. Performance. Ich bin sprachlos. Was macht man alles mit? Nem, ma megtudtam.
Hát mindig.
Én már minden
Női ruhákban.
Csak ne tetováljátok magatokat, azt nem tudom. Mindenen lehet változtatni. Hát meg már operációs van a légy. Tele akció. És a legjobb, hogy még egy luk is van rajta, amiből folyik. Nem, hát... Na most...
So with this video, I mean, I condensed it obviously a lot, and I wanted to convey the uncomfortableness in a way, also through including a lot of the laughter. I think laughter was, I mean, a lot of nervous laughter also. And the few quotes I translated in English and written down were from, I mean, one you heard in German my father say, and the other one was from the conversation with my mother, where she said at some point that you wear it, the dress hurts me deeply. And so in a second phase of this project, then as I mentioned in the beginning, I invited people to this house in Alpine, which was a bit outside of San Diego where I was living, in an empty house that belonged to the father of a friend who the father passed away recently as well. And I invited them to eat with me, and so when they were there, I at some point asked individual people to come sit with me, and I had altogether around 8 meals, and amazingly I didn't get sick. So I had these one-on-one conversations with people and eating with them, and it also became, it was the last month of my stay in California. I've lived 6 years in California then, and I would come to Switzerland afterwards, and so this also became this kind of goodbye ritual for me of it was obviously people that I knew mostly, and so it was a very intimate setting, and for me it was also kind of this transformative ritual. And so what I did was I was talking to them, ate with them, and at some point I would break into a song. I would sing a cappella to them, the Leonard Cohen song, kind of change the lyrics a bit of I'm Your Man, and so kind of even more conveying this idea or this longing of this character to want to be or find a partner. So it was also kind of this idea that these dinners were kind of a search for finding someone. Yes, and so in this work there's already these themes that come up for me that kind of come up again and again in the other works. I also there are two other works I will show you of death and desire, and so it carried over to the next piece 4 years later. It was called There's Someone Missing, that I did here in 2015 in the Stadtgalerie Bern, and it was a durational piece where I would embroider a piece of fine fabric for about, it varied on the opening hours of the galleries, so between 2 and 4 hours. And I would at the same time make noises, sounds with my voice, and every now and then I would also look up into the audience and try to meet their gaze. So and what I was embroidering on the fabric were words, and it said, "Where are you?" And this piece came out of a research of grief and mourning, particularly of life partners, and this was strongly probably inspired by, or I had the urge to understand grief and mourning more, because I was living with a family when I first moved to Switzerland as a kind of au pair, in which the husband or the father of the two kids that I helped take care of died a few years earlier. So death and grief and absence and remembrance were very present, and so I tried to understand better how that would how you can describe that feeling. And at the same time it was also about this yearning to actually find someone that you would mourn about so deeply. And so one of the books I wrote was from Joan Didion, The Year of Magical Thinking, who wrote about her experience of losing her husband. And I wanted to read to you this quote that kind of captured my findings in the research. Grief turns out to be a place none of us know until we reach it, nor can we know ahead of the fact, and here lies the heart of the difference between grief as we imagine it and grief as it is, the unending absence that follows, the void, the very opposite of meaning, the relentless succession of moments during which we will confront the experience of meaninglessness itself. So I came to this conclusion that in the end you can't really be prepared for grief ever. You can't really describe it properly either, because it's just meaningless, I guess, as Didion writes. And so in this performance I tried to translate this through this durational format of kind of just keep crying and this, or wailing and making these sounds, kind of having also the senseless task of embroidering these words, and at the same time trying to create meaning through this repetitive gesture of writing down this question and trying to hold on to some control through this gesture. And so I want to show you a short, this was just taken with an iPhone, but of the performance, the video. so as I said, this carried on for many hours, and so also the voice became more and more rough sometimes with time, and it or coarse, and yeah, for me it also again became this ritual, and this I kind of got into this zone where I was just very much focused on this task, but at the same time trying to connect with the audience. And so here you can see the embroidery. This was actually, it's called tambour beading. It's a specific kind of embroidery technique that that the dress that I wore of my grandmother, it used this technique, or it was used on this dress, and that's when I first got to know it, and then I learned to do it myself. And so here you can kind of see the beading. And so every time I did the performance, a new piece of textile was created. So it also became this archive of these gestures, but also of this search. And yeah, as I said, it was kind of there was this ambiguity about, is this question towards someone lost or someone that I'm still searching for? And the next piece was much more clearly focused on this desire to connect with someone now or in the future. And the question was how to get there. This was the performance Let Me Go Down, which I first performed last year in 2017 here in Zurich. This is at the Réunion when it still existed. And I wrote another invitation for that, which actually connects to the first invitation that I read to you, so I want to read you this one too. My dear, it's been almost 6 years exactly, and I still long for you. Actually, I'm desperate. I've gone through a lot of changes and transformations since our last encounter in California. I discovered the joys and pleasures of short liaisons, yet my loneliness prevails. I had a dream, an embrace from behind. I remember the sensation, a tingling all across my back. I felt taken care of, as if someone cared about me. I smiled. I was calm and happy. I felt like I arrived in the arms of somebody. I've said goodbye to love many times these past years, and yet I don't want to be alone. My longing returns like a song that I can't get out of my head. I want to perform for you. I want to give you a show. I might fail, I might not be good enough, but I want to try. I'm ready to humiliate and destroy myself to become someone new with you. Yours, Robert. So this was about 45-minute long kind of performance concert. I collaborated with a drummer and producer, Guillaume Triomphant. And so we had a lot of rehearsal periods together and really developed the piece together. I mean, I wrote the text and the concepts, but it came out of also a lot of musical improvisation. And formally I was interested for this piece to explore more, actually perform music, writing and singing songs. And so here you can see I was also very and I was also interested in this idea of this pop persona in a way that is able to talk about love publicly and make themselves vulnerable publicly, and at the same time there's this artificial or this not so clear boundary between artificial and authentic self. And so here I was also kind of trying to go back to this one-to-one experience that I more clearly had in the first piece that I showed you and my significant other, by really talking directly to audience members but still having the whole audience engaged too. Dance sequence. I'm just kind of showing them different gestures of humiliation and or not, kind of being on the edge of that. Again, speaking directly to the audience members. And from the topics again that came up were again as these two of death and desire, but more specifically of this, I was interested in the connection between death and eroticism, or how is there a connection? And I found more this idea of the death of the self interesting, that is kind of the goal or can happen in eroticism, and I was kind of investigating how to get there. And one of the, wanted to show you one, it's a bit of a complicated quote from a greatly titled text, Is the Rectum a Grave? But yeah, I'll read to you and then I will explain what I found interesting. I want to approach the subject from a quite different angle, and to argue that a gravely dysfunctional aspect of what is, after all, the healthy pleasure we take in the operation of a coordinated and strong physical organism is the temptation to deny the perhaps equally strong appeal of powerlessness, of the loss of control. I don't mean the value of gentleness or non-aggressiveness, or even of passivity, but rather of a more radical disintegration and humiliation of the self. For there's finally, beyond the fantasies of bodily power and subordination that I have just discussed, a transgressing of that very polarity which, as Georges Bataille has proposed, may be the profound sense of both certain mystical experiences and of human sexuality. So, I mean, the whole essay, I think I've read it 5 times, and it's very dense and still don't understand everything, but it's, what I found inspiring was this idea of the appeal of powerlessness and of the loss of control, and the idea that you get there through this transgression of, or so going beyond just power and subordination, and yeah, that this creates this kind of mystical experience and or erotic experience. And he mentions Georges Bataille. He's a French philosopher and writer, and I read a couple of his texts also in this research and used some of it in in the text that I performed, I did this mixed up my own writings and quotes, and I think the quotes helped me to push myself beyond my own edge, kind of using words of others and making them my own, because I was also interested in this idea of shame and guilt, and that this is what actually kind of stops you from getting to this place. And so kind of in this vein of faking it until you make it, I also use the words by others, and I want to show you in a video an example of that. Oh. You see. Don't you remember? We're standing at the edge of the cliff together. You came here to join us for tea with some other friends at our place, right? Well, instead of tea, we'll drink quantities of chilled champagne and warm piss. To urinate is to terminate. I have a furious cock, ready for the destruction and death of the self. It struck me that death is the sole outcome of my erection. Yeah, so actually quite a big chunk of that part. I mean, it's adapted and rewritten, but the idea of the party where you drink champagne and piss, or I think even the phrase of a furious cock came from a book from Bataille, and I kind of used those words then to make them my own, or the performers. Another aspect that I said I was fascinated with, and I kind of also was part of the research, was to kind of imitate these pop personas. So I just like these gestures of this hyper public platforms. I mean, these are TV performances of these superstars, and yet they transport this kind of very intimate or personal energy. And I mean, it's not that I really, kind of tried to imitate that directly, but I just looked at these images and now when I compare them, you can see some of the resemblance. And I want to end on this picture that was taken in preparation, when I was preparing for this performance, Let Me Go Down, because for me this part is actually a very important part of the process, and also very enjoyable one when everything else is set, the technical stuff, I know what I'm doing. I can go and arrange the flowers and the candles and the light, but this is all very much part of my practice and of kind of creating these spaces in which I can meet the audience intimately, where they feel comfortable enough to kind of go this journey with me, and this kind of getting to the edge of what's comfortable or not can but I think kind of having these inviting spaces helps me and the audience to connect in a way, and so this also carried through from the very first image I showed you, where I prepared table and food, to still, even if I'm trying to kind of make more of a concert setting, to still have this personal touch. So thank you, and now we're open to questions.
Thank you, Robbie, for your presentation. So this is microphone for questions. So if you want to make questions, otherwise I'd like to ask you something, or more like a comment actually. I will sit here. It seems like the works you present from the beginning, they are very in the domestic context. The very first works you show in making a recreation of a sense, for recreate somehow the absence of the other. I mean, something symbolically, the absence of the other. And does your, is that more or less the main subject that you could, if you had like explain about a subject that you develop in your work, will you say that is the absence of the other, or how is it for you?
Yeah, I think you can definitely say that up until this performance, there kind of was the absence of the other, and also this a friend of mine wrote, or someone wrote about the performance I did in California back then, and used this phrase of queer domesticity, which I kind of liked, that kind of creating this kind of queer home, and so I think in some ways I think what's going through the works is also this search for home or roots, and I think I kind of this crosses with the search for the other, because the other maybe becomes this home, and it's not a place. It's not a place necessarily. Yes.
And in the piece of Let Me Go Down, will you say that you were driven by the object of desire, that is also somehow a transcription of your idea of the other, because you're addressing your letters to someone? Is this a fictional character? It's like just the statement of reading something that seems something private, but then you bring it into public.
It's definitely. It's a fictional other, and at the same time, it's obviously the audience that reads it. So I like that, to keep that open, or it's kind of. I want to. It's kind of letter to the one who reads it, since it's an invitation to the performance. But obviously, it's also this fictional other that's not. You don't see anywhere.
And when you're producing your works, still are you still using this approach of the belonging of the other, or this idea of the construction of desire, or this, you mentioned graving, the process of graving, and but not in the last one, right? Or how is it the development of the concepts you're using in your work?
Yeah, I'm kind of refining what I want to talk about, but I think it's becoming about for one kind communication with the other, or like how to actually still about connecting and kind of being understood and understanding the other, and yes, kind of trying to, but more kind of in the midst of it, kind of,
Okay.
a little bit
It's
messy.
complex. Yeah, it's complex. Yeah. And will you tell us what are you currently working in? What's your next show, or what are your wishes and desires in your practices at the moment? Like, what are you driving to?
Well, I want to take some time to kind of do some reading and writing, actually, and next year I'm gonna go on a residency. So I'm not planning on really producing necessarily much before that, but kind of using that time to reflect and see where it goes from now. Because I feel like I've maybe kind of reached a point with this line of, I mean, it probably will continue into the future, but I don't know. But I kind of need to dive into some research into myself again, I think. And but the topic of death actually keeps coming up as well. And I'm still, it's still somehow the big top, or I think it says a lot about us and how we deal with that.
Great, thank you, Roy. I love to invite you to make an interrogatory to Rob. No. Now, if you feel like to ask something about his practice, that's the best moment. Just, do you want to make a question? Just because we are recording, so I give you the microphone.
Is it much more difficult to be like in an uncomfortable situation in front of the family as for an unknown audience?
If it's harder in front of the family, or I mean, it's more existential in a way. It's more. I was also still quite young, and it was this very personal testing of boundaries as well. So it felt much more real in a way, and now there's a more of a distance. It's obviously more fictional if I perform in this setting of a gallery and with an audience, or in an art space. So it did affect me. Differently, but it's kind of this development, because again the performance in the same year with in this house was also still very personal in a way, and I felt it very strongly somehow, this emotional transformation through it, and working through something. And so I think more and more I move towards distancing the performing self from from myself. Well, I mean, but yeah, they're always connected, obviously. um,
Did you do more works involving or using your parents as an audience, or like in this really like at home, or was that the only one you did something with them?
I think it was the only one I did like this.
Yeah, I mean, from the outside, it also looks like that was maybe. You said that was around bachelor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it's like early, and then you do things out of yourself, and there's things you don't want to deal with. Yeah, I mean, it's now it gets more abstracted. I think that's very natural, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's a development, but it was very close to me back then, or I mean, it's still close, but it was very intuitive as well. Videos. Oh, you mean when of my childhood?
So a few years ago you worked together with your brother with some videos of your childhood. So I guess
that's true. Yeah, it was more a collaboration with my brother in a way. That was more initiated by him though. But so yeah, there was. Yeah, that's another work within the family. We're also an artistic family. So he's a filmmaker. Yeah. And my grandfather also. Yeah, so they weren't totally new to the concept of art and
your father too.
Yes, but still this was as you could hear in the video, it was still shocking. And I actually I wrote some logs back then about this. I mean, also kind of from this. I mean, it's nice to read now, but yeah, there's some very mature thoughts and some very naive ones. But I forgot about this. I was actually planning in this project to kind of collaborate with my mother at some point, and kind of wanted to first record the conversation with her and then kind of take her into the project. Kind of, I think, in this vision that we could come closer through that, but then I realized that it was too much already my idea anyway, and yeah, and it wouldn't have worked. But I think somehow this is actually keeps coming up as an idea to collaborate with my mother at some point, but I don't know if it's ever gonna happen.
Yeah, I guess this work of family constellations, it's that actually. It's really like this work of working doesn't stop now. So maybe in the future you will see if you make the test and see what's coming out.
Kind of trying to create a family, I guess.
More easy, maybe. Yeah, sometimes it happens. Yeah, sometimes it's more easy. Yeah. Well, so do you like to share us your statement before we had a drink? Yeah, please. Yeah.
The thing that you did with friction, how did this work with your personal work, or it was not at all your personal work, or because I mean, this is how I know from this. I know you they did a collective 4 people or something, right?
Yes, so we were for those who don't know, I was also, or I am part of a collective called Friction, and we mostly curated art spaces, but also did some performances. And so what the question is, how
if your personal work was also within there, or if it was something completely separate from your artistic work.
I mean, in some ways I separated it I mean, for example, the second work I showed, There's Someone Missing, was I created when we were still working as a collective as well, and so when there was the first work I did solo again after a while of being in the collective, and when I was doing it, I realized that I'm following kind of other themes when I'm just working alone, and has this much more personal approach. But I think what connects it is this idea of hosting, which we were interested in as a collective, kind of. So that's kind of what went through all our projects, that we were always kind of in this role of host, either by running art spaces also kind of, it was always very important for us when we were curating exhibitions, that we would have dinners with the artists, and so these whole processes. And so I think this was interest we all had, and I think you can also tell from at least the first and last piece that this is also a interest of mine and kind of big part of my practice. Yeah.
Thank you, Manu, for your question. Yeah, so then just to close it, if it's fine for you, if there's no more questions. Are you ever thinking to practice collaboratively, like again, to ever came to your mind to have some collaborative practice in where you share authorship as you did? Not really.
No, I mean, I really enjoyed the collaboration with Guillaume and the musician, and I would love actually to do more works in this kind of collaboration, but I guess in this setting, it was still this clear boundary that I have the last say, kind of the thing, and then the collective, it's under the collective name and not just under my name, and I think that makes a difference in the process. But I think it would be, I mean, especially because I am also still interested and curious about working more with music, for example, and I'm not an expert at all, or I'm not really educated in that. That's how I would like to collaborate with